Appendix A. A brief review of issues relating to the reality of the abduction phenomenon. Since the publication of the hardcover edition of this book, in April 1994, a number of questions have been raised about the reality of the alien abduction phenomenon and the evidential basis for crediting the experiencers' accounts of what has happened to them. These questions relate to the nature of the physical evidence which accompanies the abduction reports, the client's expectations and possible investigator influence, the reliability of memory in relation to the experiences, the degree to which hypnosis influences the accuracy of memory, and alternatives to the hypothesis that what the experiencers describe is, allowing for the ordinary reconstructions of memory, what has occurred. This is an entirely new area of inquiry, and these are questions that can only be answered fully by a great deal more research. This appendix has been added to begin a discussion of these questions, especially by highlighting those aspects of the abduction phenomenon that, in my view, would need to be considered if such future explorations are to prove fruitful. The ontological context. Before any of these matters may be usefully considered, it is important to place the abduction phenomenon in an ontological context, for the reality status of this, like any subject, will determine the relevance of more specific questions and criticisms. This book describes a clinical map of the abduction territory, which I believe shows that we are dealing with a phenomenon that may not originate in our physical reality, but penetrates variably into it or manifests within it in a variety of ways. This very concept is somewhat revolutionary and difficult to understand within our current modern secular worldview. Nevertheless, my experiences with abductees push me toward this conclusion. In the case of some abduction experiences, the individual appears actually to be missing as reported by others, but other incidents seem more like out-of-body experiences or even encounters with strange forms of light, sound, vibratory or other energies capable of creating strong tactile sensations, but without the occurrence of anything that could be called an abduction in any literal sense. The phenomenon appears to operate in subtle, elusive, even tricky ways, as if a mischievous intelligence were at work. Yet I have come to the view, after 5 years of involvement in this field, that this subtlety is intrinsic to it and must be embraced if we are to penetrate the mysteries of the abduction phenomenon. To some of my critics, the possibility that the abduction experience actually occurred but not altogether in our physical reality, nor in any reality or dimension to which we have access by empirical means, would be a contradiction in terms. But others have been open to the possibility that these experiences are occurring, at least in part, in another reality. Scientists like Fred Alan Wolf, Rudolf Schild, Jacques Vallée, Carl Brunstad and Ronald Bryan are confronting the possibility that there exist parallel universes or other dimensions of reality from which information and material may enter our physical world. But if the possibility may be allowed that there are unseen domains of reality, and in exploring abduction experiences, we are dealing with a realm or realms in which objective, direct, and external measurement is not possible, then we must, of necessity, rely for our knowledge on subjective reports of human experience. Even research like psychiatric social worker John Carpenter's accounts of experiences abducted simultaneously, where the reports corresponded in minute detail, depends on the evaluation of subjective experience. Carpenter, 1993. It seems to me that a responsible and encompassing study of the abduction phenomenon calls for the development and application of a science of subjective experience, such as that described by Stollerow, 1992, as personal reports are our principal source of knowledge of abductions. We must be especially rigorous in evaluating their authenticity, affective intensity, and consistency in comparing them with one another. as well as the motivation, skepticism, believability, and sincerity of the reporter in reference to his or her experience, and the relation of the abduction experiences to the story of the person's life. I might point out, however, that this kind of evaluation of subjective accounts without corroborating physical evidence is the principal data of psychoanalysis and psychodynamic psychiatry. A correct psychodynamic formulation explains past memories and current behaviors and predicts future behaviors. Similarly, an adequate analysis of subjective abduction experience should be corroborated by and inform physical findings as well as predict future events. The question of physical evidence. I have been faulted frequently by critics, especially by professional colleagues in science and medicine, and even by those in the UFO field itself who are seeking legitimacy within mainstream science, for not dealing in this book more fully with the physical evidence that does exist for UFOs and abductions. This is a fascinating and controversial field that invites further study by those best qualified to do so. But it is important to keep in mind that every aspect of the physical evidence, from the sightings of UFOs, the burned earth they leave behind, and the strange behavior of electronic devices in association with abductions, to the reported absences of abductees during the abductions, missing pregnancies, subcutaneous implants, bodily cuts, scoop marks, and other skin lesions, is also, as described above, subtle, elusive, and difficult to prove. There is a large literature in this field which the interested reader might wish to consult. Hopkins, 1987, Pritchard, 1992, Valley, 1988, Jacobs, 1992, Fowler, 1979, Neal, 1992, Howe, 1989. I have chosen in this book to emphasize my strong suit as a psychiatrist, namely the power of carefully evaluated experiential reports corroborated where possible by physical evidence. From my perspective, the physical evidence is important to corroborate the experiencer's reports. But if taken out of this context, the physical phenomena are rarely sufficiently robust to stand in their own right. If, for example, I were to publish photographs of skin lesions, even from several experiencers who obtained them in the same night during reported abductions, as occurred in one case in Florida, I would, as a physician, be leaving myself open to the legitimate criticism by dermatologists that I could not prove that they were directly related to the abduction experiences and not caused by other factors. Client expectations and possible investigator influence. Another central issue in the study of abduction experiences concerns the possibility of investigator suggestion or influence. Critics have speculated that experiencers are producing abduction accounts in compliance with my expectations or influence. As a psychiatrist, I am well aware of how powerful the caring intention of a therapist can be in helping people change their lives. I have, therefore, tried to be extremely scrupulous to avoid using that power to elicit abduction material. Colleagues and others who have observed my regression sessions or who have transcribed regression sessions verify that I do not lead my cases. Karen Spearstra, Personal Communication, 1994. Indeed, if I consciously attempt to lead experiencers, I find it peculiarly difficult to do so, in or out of hypnosis. They will directly contradict a statement which is incorrectly reflected back to them, and will clearly differentiate between material from their own experience and material they have heard or read about, which is inconsistent with their own. Furthermore, I am often surprised and startled by the material revealed to me by experiencers. When I was beginning this work, their reports shattered all expectations, and they continue to challenge my own sense of reality. For these reasons, I find it unlikely that experiencers are trying to provide stories which conform to my expectations. Finally, and important for me to underscore as a clinician in speaking to the experiencers in a manner that accepts the emotional truthfulness of their reports. I am not taking a position that validates the literal occurrence of these experiences in our physical reality. Good clinical practice, especially in cases of traumatized individuals, must follow different guidelines than objective scientific investigation. There is, however, the possibility that the experiencers are responding to more subtle pressures or expectations. I cannot altogether dismiss this possibility, but there are factors which argue against it as a significant distorting element. Current research delineates two areas of suggestibility, which may, at first glance, be relevant to the retrieval of biased abduction reports. The first area concerns post-event suggestibility. Laboratory memory researchers have shown that apparently innocuous but leading questions about the details of a slideshow or film can significantly impair accuracy of responses. Loftus, 1993. But abduction experiences differ from laboratory experiences in that the former are first-hand, emotionally charged, and of central importance. Indeed, researchers of events of impact have concluded that memory for these events is retained better than laboratory audio-visual stimuli. Christensen, 1992. Second, the more involved a person is in an event, the greater the likelihood that the central event is accurately remembered over time. Uele and Tollestrup, 1992. Emotion has been shown to aid memory for the central event of the story, although it undermines memory for more peripheral details. Reisberg and Hoyer, 1992. Thus, the lower levels of accuracy found in laboratory memory research are not likely to be directly applicable to abduction research. Clearly, investigators should try to minimize the use of leading questions in any case. Investigation of interrogatory suggestibility clearly demonstrates that, under situations of extreme social pressure, false beliefs about actions and events can be created. Gudjonsson, 1991, Brown, 1995. My interactions with experiencers do not approach the conditions under which such false beliefs develop. First, my relationship with experiencers is not closed or exclusive. Individuals contact me and meet with me irregularly, with meetings weeks, months, or years apart. After initial disclosure to a willing listener, many experiencers are reluctant to continue to discuss their experiences, as they find it necessary to distance themselves from the material in order to cope with their daily lives. Second, there is little or no social value to be gained from reporting abduction experiences. Third, no repeated questioning or intense focus on past events is necessary to bring forth these experiences. Abduction material arises quite readily, often with a minimum of relaxation and an attentional shift from an external focus. Lastly, experiencers are not motivated to believe in the truth of their experiences. Often they prefer to believe that they have had some sort of bad dream, and become intensely distressed when they realize in the interview that they were not asleep when the experience began. Or they hope that I will find some sort of psychiatric explanation that can be treated so that the experiences can be stopped. Not only does the discovery of the actuality of the abduction experiences shatter their sense of reality, but this realization means that they may be subject to these disturbing experiences in the future. Accepting the presence of these extraordinary events in their lives helps experiencers cope with some of the negative repercussions from those experiences. However, even after the powerful reliving of abduction experiences, these individuals usually continue to resist accepting the actuality of what they report at some level. Catherine, for example, who told me the story described in Chapter 7, became upset when I recently gave her a scientist's report of media accounts of UFO sightings along the northeast Atlantic coast in March 1991. These accounts corresponded to the time of one of her most powerful abduction experiences. This circumstantial corroboration of her experience in the physical world undercut some of the remaining denial of its actuality, which had enabled her to remain productive in a culture which also denies this reality and tends to discredit people who report such experiences. Reliability of memory. The apparently false accusation in some instances of parents and other adults by individuals claiming they have been sexually abused has led to a contemporary controversy regarding the accuracy of reports of previously forgotten memories, especially as recovered in the context of psychotherapy. Lindsay and Red, 1994, Brown, 1995. The criticism of false or inaccurate memory has, not unexpectedly, been leveled at abduction reports. Here, again, the problem of responding to the relevant arguments is complicated by the fact that we are still in the process of trying to learn what has happened. In what reality is this phenomenon occurring? Since we cannot answer the matter of the accuracy of abduction memories by offering physical proof, the appropriate questions might be, did something happen to these individuals? And if so, how do we decide what it was? There is good evidence that we can, indeed, trust that something extraordinary has happened to experiencers. As mentioned above, most research in the memory field indicates that memories associated with events that are of central importance to the individual's lives tend to be more accurate than those that are of more peripheral significance. Christianson, 1992. In such core experiences, as previously noted, emotion tends to aid memories of the central events of the story while undermining memory for more peripheral events. Reisberg and Hoyer, 1992. Adding complexity to this picture, however, are the findings that traumatic memories or experiences occurring under conditions of high arousal may be stored differently in the limbic system of the brain than less intense events. Van der Kolk, 1994, Ledoux, 1993. In these situations, memory appears to be encoded along sensorimotor, olfactory and visual channels, rather than within the semantic framework of normal memory. This may make traumatic memories less vulnerable to the same reconstructive but distorting tendencies of normal memory processing. Van der Kolk, 1994, Corbusier, 1994, Brown, 1995. However, at the present time, this is merely speculation. There is little hard data about the accuracy of material transformed from traumatic to semantic memory. More research is needed in this area. Clearly, abduction experiences are of vital importance to their experiencers, and they are sometimes, although not always, highly traumatic. Virtually everyone who has been with an abduction experiencer while he or she was recovering abduction material has been impressed with the effective power and the intensity of the bodily sensations that the individual is undergoing. These observers, like myself, have been impressed that something important has happened, even if we cannot know exactly what took place, or that every detail reported was exactly accurate. Similarly, in commenting on the controversial application of laboratory memory research to the courts, Shefflin notes, "It is illogical to reason from the fact emphasis his that a memory has false details to the conclusion that there is no real incident from which this false memory is an accurate depiction." Shefflin, 1994. As has so often been said, there is as yet no recorded abduction experience that proved upon investigation to be a reflection of some other trauma or experience, despite a great deal of effort on the part of investigators to find some other source for these experiences. Nevertheless, therapists must be very careful not to validate the literal truth of what abduction experiencers report, helping experiencers keep an open mind as to what happened while exploring all possibilities. It seems clear to me at this time that we are not dealing with false or confabulated memories. However, because we are so dependent in abduction research upon subjective recall, it is vitally important to continue to collect abduction accounts from many different individuals so that the consistencies, variabilities, and other qualities of these narratives may be more firmly established. Accuracy of hypnosis. The potential inaccuracy of memories recalled under hypnosis must be considered in evaluating abduction reports. Frankel, 1993. Studies do show that inaccurate material may be recovered under hypnosis. McConkie, 1992, Shefflin and Shapiro, 1989. For this reason, hypnotically obtained reports must be compared to reports made from conscious recall and to other corroborating evidence. However, it is wrong to assume that because hypnosis can interfere with memory, it inevitably must do so. Shefflin, 1994. My personal experience is that abduction material recovered under hypnosis parallels what has been obtained by conscious reporting. And although research shows that some subjects have greater confidence in both these and false memories, recalled under hypnosis, the abduction experiencers with whom I have worked retain for the most part a skeptical and inquiring attitude regarding the factual accuracy of their encounters, this in spite of the emotional power of the apparent memories that are recovered. Furthermore, in some of my cases, see for example Ed and Sheila in chapters 3 and 4, the material recalled during the regression seemed more likely to be accurate than that reported in face-to-face interviews, because 1, the information was less self-serving or compatible with positive self-esteem, or conversely, more disturbing to self-regard, and in some instances, even humiliating. 2, the material that emerged in the regressions was more believable in the sense that it was consistent with accounts provided by other experiencers. It lacked the gloss and ordering of recollections in conformity with conventional reality that tends to occur with conscious reporting. And 3, although emotional involvement is no guarantee of the accuracy of memory, with or without hypnosis, the intensity of affect and expressed bodily feeling that occurs during the regression sessions of abduction experiences is so powerful that even the most determined skeptic would be hard-pressed to conclude that so. Nothing quite extraordinary and reality-shattering did not occur. Sheila's psychiatrist, for example, who had worked with her for 7 years, came away from the 2 regressions he observed convinced that if not actual alien abductions, something very much like them had occurred. It is hard to imagine how the psyche could generate so intense a level of emotion without some kind of exposure to an extraordinary experience as the template for that emotion. Most importantly, it might be useful to restate that a large proportion of the material relating to abductions is recalled without the use of an altered state of consciousness, and that many abduction reporters appear to relive powerful experiences after only the most minimal relaxation exercise, hardly justifying the word hypnosis at all. The relaxation exercise is useful to relieve the experiencer's need to attend to the social demands and other stimuli of face-to-face conversation, and to relieve the energies involved in repressing memories and emotion. In the case of the abduction phenomenon, this process appears to fill out the recalled experience. Ongoing research is needed to explore the degree to which significant distortion occurs with hypnosis in abduction cases. Alternative explanations. It is useful, I think, to observe that the most intense demand for alternative explanations tends to come from those who are either unfamiliar with the rich complexity of the abduction phenomenon itself, or from those who are so wedded to a worldview in which the idea of an intelligence or beings from outside of the Earth visiting us is simply not possible, that they find unacceptable the idea that such experiences might actually be occurring. These individuals might believe in the existence of a personal God or a supreme being, yet not find possible the notion that cosmic entities such as these might enter our physical and mental world. What some of these critics may not realize is that frequently abduction experiencers have already been subjected to intense investigations of their abduction-related symptoms by physicians and various mental health professionals seeking a variety of neurophysiological and/or psychological and emotional explanations, sometimes with frustrating and even damaging effects. See, for example, the cases of Scott, Sheila, and Paul in this book. It is not possible within the confines of this study to review all of the alternative explanations that have been offered to account for the abduction phenomenon. They range from various forms of psychopathology to physiological disorders or responses of the brain to psychosocial and cultural interpretations. Most of these ignore fundamental aspects of the phenomenon, such as the strong doubting of the experiences themselves, the tight association with UFOs, sometimes observed independently in the experiencer's community, the various physical findings, including the fact that the experiencer is sometimes observed to be missing, or the occurrence of the phenomenon in small children. For any theory to be taken seriously, it must, at least potentially, take into account the entire complex range of phenomena associated with alien abduction experiences. Psychiatric examinations and numerous psychological tests have failed to reveal forms of mental illness that could, conceivably, explain the abduction phenomenon. Mack, 1995, Blücher, Claymore, and Hopkins, 1985, Parnell and Sprinkle, 1990, Rodegear, Goodpaster, and Blatterbauer, 1991, Zimmer, 1984, Spanos, Cross, Dixon, and De Breuil, 1993. Some have suggested that we might be dealing with some sort of displacement from another kind of trauma, especially sexual abuse, Class 1988. It is true that abduction experiences do show some of the symptoms associated with post-traumatic states, but these symptoms appear to be the result, not the cause, of what the experiencers have undergone. Furthermore, there is much more involved in the complex narratives of abduction experiences than human trauma per se. There are, for example, consistent details of passage to and from the craft, the rich descriptions of the alien beings and the intricate relationships to them, the many non-traumatic activities and observations that occur within the craft, and the elaborate communications concerning the Earth's ecology and other psycho-spiritual matters, which are, in my experience, a frequent, if not regular, dimension of the abduction phenomenon. I have never encountered anything similar to this in patients I have known to be traumatized by humans, or in psychotic patients suffering from delusions. Some experiencers do have histories of sexual abuse and other traumas. One investigator has even found a higher than average incidence of sexual abuse among individuals reporting UFO encounters. Ring, 1992. If abduction were acting as an effective screen memory, one would expect the prevalence of sex abuse to be lower, not higher. Furthermore, abduction experiencers seem able, when interviewed carefully, to distinguish the residua of their alien abduction experiences from other kinds of trauma they may have undergone. It bears repeating that no case has yet been reported where the alien abduction story masked another kind of traumatic experience. The reverse, however, has frequently been noted, including in my case experience, i.e., that a client presenting with a complaint of possible sexual abuse or trauma has discovered a history of alien abduction experiences, even when being treated by a therapist unfamiliar with the phenomenon and certainly not expecting that an abduction story would emerge. Others have suggested that abduction experiences are a reworking of imagery related to birth trauma. Lawson, 1984, and his colleague McCall found that imagined abduction imagery in a small sample of non-experiencers was related to aspects of their birth histories, but this has not yet been replicated with individuals reporting abduction experiences. Obviously, the relationship between abduction phenomena and other forms of trauma needs to be investigated further. Others explain abduction phenomena based on the notion that abduction experiences have personality traits, such as fantasy proneness, hypnotizability, or a strong tendency to dissociation, which predispose them to these experiences. Individuals who are highly hypnotizable have the capacity to generate rich images and fantasies, which are reported to rival real events in intensity. Wickramaseka, 1986. Studies by Rodegear et al., 1991, and Spanos, 1993, found that experiencers were neither more hypnotizable nor more fantasy-prone than the general population, although these results remain to be replicated. Abduction may be related to dissociation, a tendency to split off some elements of the ego from disturbing mental content in order to preserve the stability and functioning of the psyche. Jacobson, 1995, Powers, 1994. But as already discussed in this book, dissociation is a coping mechanism. A strong tendency to dissociate tells us nothing per se about the source of the stress that gave rise to this mode of adaptation. Neurophysiological explanations include sleep paralysis and temporal lobe epilepsy. Spanos et al. 1993, Persinger 1992, Blackmore 1994. But researchers exploring these possibilities have either failed to find such pathology among abduction experiencers or have chosen to overlook important aspects of the phenomenon. For example, many abduction experiences occur under conditions that do not appear to be associated with sleep. Second, abduction experiences are often corroborated by independent UFO sightings or physical evidence. Third, neurophysiological explanations do not account for hyperarousal and anxiety, triggered by certain events or images symbolically linked to abduction. With the integration of the specific abduction-related traumatic experience, these reactions sometimes resolve, as predicted by theories of post-traumatic stress disorder. Some have suggested that in alien abductions, we are dealing with some sort of mass psychosis, hysteria, or hallucination, Sagan 1993. But abductions do not resemble mass phenomena, Hall 1995. Abductees are generally individuals who have, at least before being brought in contact with other experiencers for purposes of support, been isolated from people having similar experiences. Many of the details they report are not known in the culture, or, at least until recently, reported in the mass media. Although it cannot be proven that no elements of abduction experiences have been incorporated from these media, by and large abductees avoid media accounts of abductions and are uniquely distressed by them. My impression is that the traffic is stronger the other way, i.e., that abduction stories based on actual clinical cases find their way into the work of media producers hungry for this material. Careful research on the complex relationship between the electronic and print media and the evolution of the alien abduction phenomenon waits to be undertaken. Finally, a Jungian depth psychological explanation of abductions might be fertile ground for further explanation, especially since Carl Jung pioneered the exploration of this field. Shubo 1994. Abductees may, in fact, communicate in their reports material suggestive of the Jungian archetypes of birth, death, cosmic powers, joining with the source of creation, etc. This material, I believe, is important insofar as it reflects the profound psychological impact, opening, and meaning of the abduction experiences. I have considered a Jungian interpretation, but a radical application such as this of Jung's notion of archetypes would inevitably introduce a wealth of new philosophical and scientific questions without the possibility of doing justice to them. Unless we are to consider the whole universe in its psycho-spiritual and physical dimensions as but the play of consciousness, we would be hard-pressed to explain UFOs and all the physical elements associated with the abduction phenomenon in these purely depth psychological terms. In addition, a Jungian approach, to be really helpful, would need to account for the rich complexity, the detailed narrative consistency, and the specific contemporary forms of the UFO phenomenon and the abduction experiences. Summary. In sum, the position to which I have come, after many hundreds of hours of work with abduction experiences, is that we are dealing here with a profound mystery that has potentially vast implications for our contemporary world. For I have no basis for concluding as yet that anything other than what experiencers say happened to them actually did. The experiential data, which in the absence of more robust physical evidence is the most important information that we have, suggests that abduction experiences have been visited by some sort of alien intelligence which has impacted them physically and psychologically. Indeed, this conclusion fits so tightly with the data that I and other abduction researchers have collected that it is doubtful to me that this possibility would be so vigorously resisted if the phenomenon did not violate our scientific worldview and the implied control of our living environment that accompanies it. It seems impossible to avoid the observation that the alien abduction phenomenon is occurring in the context of a planetary ecological crisis that is reaching critical proportions, and that information about this situation is often powerfully conveyed by the alien beings to the experiencers. As part of our effort to explore whether the abduction phenomenon, as has been suggested, is primarily a Western occurrence, my colleague Dominique Kalimanopoulos and I have been exploring alien abductions in other countries and among American indigenous peoples. In November 1994, we interviewed Credo Mutwa, a Zulu medicine man in South Africa, who described classical abduction experiences. And we also talked with many children in a school outside Harare, the capital of Zimbabwe, who reported seeing in broad daylight during a classroom break several UFOs and 2 alien beings just outside the schoolyard perimeter. Mr. Mutwa, who was 73 when we interviewed him, recalled vividly, for example, a terrifying experience he had had when he was 37. While on a mining job in the bush, he was suddenly transported to an enclosure with curved walls where he found himself on a table surrounded by alien beings, whose description was similar to the small greys with which we are familiar in this country. He was then subjected to the kinds of humiliating experiences described in this book. In February 1994, a farmer in Brazil reported to us with intense feeling a similar encounter with small grey beings. Mr. Mutwa and the children were both distressed by their experiences, but they also spoke spontaneously of receiving powerful communications from the alien beings, especially through their huge black eyes, about the failure of our species to take proper care of the Earth. This unsolicited information is quite consistent with what I have been learning from American experiencers. A recently interviewed geologist and abduction experiencer wrote me that his experiences have taught him that we are a runaway species bent on self-destruction because we, collectively, are unwilling to impose self-controls to stop our growth and to plan for our future with forethought and higher purpose. Bruce Cornett, Letter to the Author, December 1994. The interpretations and conclusions in this book are hypotheses, designed to invite others to join me in the exploration of this important mystery. The alien abduction field is a new one, and it deserves a broad and systematic multidisciplinary inquiry. It is my hope that, if nothing else, this book will encourage at least some of the skeptics who have criticized my methods and hypotheses to immerse themselves in the primary data of this field, namely the experiences of those who have undergone the abduction encounters, and draw their own conclusions about what is taking place here and what it might mean for the human future. Appendix B, a historical and cross-cultural perspective on reported encounters. Dominique Kalimanopoulos and John E. Mack, MD, Beings from the Sky or Other Domains Through History. The connection between humans and beings from other dimensions has been illustrated in myths and stories from various cultures for millennia. There are peoples around the world who customarily communicate with non-human intelligences and spirits through a variety of means. These communications and the myths they generate are an integral part of the cosmologies of many non-Western cultures, constituting for each a kind of ontological skeleton upon which hangs the balance of culture, customs, and lifestyle. Throughout history, many societies have acknowledged consciousness as something more potent than we have in the West, as a sieve or receiver and transmitter of communication with forces not always visible, other than ourselves. The contemporary Western tenet that we are alone in the universe, conversant only with ourselves, is, in fact, a minority perspective, an anomaly. Across many epochs, humans have reported making contact with a multitude of gods, spirits, angels, fairies, demons, ghouls, vampires, and sea monsters. All have been said to instruct, direct, harass, or befriend humans with varying dispositions, motives, and purposes. While many of these beings have seemed quite at home on Earth, the majority made their visits from other habitats or dimensions. The sky, in particular, has always been a popular haven for non-humans, and has come to represent extraterrestrial dimensionality rather opulently, especially as Earth's frontiers seemed in recent times to have shrunk. As Ralph Noyes has noted, we used to populate the Earth with spirits and gods. Now they have been chased away, and the sky is their haven. Noyes, 1990. In Truk, located in the Marshall Islands, people have traditionally believed in an outer world that corresponds in some ways to our modern conception of outer space. It is a world of mystery and power, a world from which people in this world derived their being. There was, moreover, a continual dialogue between the people of this world and the inhabitants of the outer spirit world. Goodenough, 1986, page 558. Likewise, Native American Hopi were traditionally taught by the Kachinas, spirit-like beings from other planets, who instructed them in agricultural techniques and gave them philosophical and moral guidelines that have shaped Hopi culture. Clark and Coleman, 1975, page 215. People in Ireland believed that fairies or the gentle folk were not earthly, having originated on other planets. Fairies often travel about the skies in cloud-like aerial boats called fairy boats or spectre ships. Rojcevic, 1991, page 481. Mircea Eliade, the renowned mythologist, has amply documented the symbolic significance of the differentiation of sky and earth, as illustrating both the separation and connection between the human and spirit worlds. According to Eliade, archaic myths worldwide speak of an extremely close proximity that existed primordially between heaven and earth. In Illo Tempore, the gods came down to earth and mingled with men, and men, for their part, could go up to heaven by climbing the mountain, tree creeper, or ladder, or might even be taken up by birds. Eliade, 1957, page 59. These ascension myths, Eliade says, these images of the earth and the heavens being somehow joined, are found in many tribes, including Australian, Pygmy, and Arctic, and have been elaborated by pastoral and sedentary cultures and transmitted right down to the great urban cultures of Oriental antiquity. When heaven was abruptly separated from earth, when the tree of the liana connecting earth to heaven was cut, or the mountain which used to touch the sky was flattened out, then the paradisiac stage was over and humans entered into their present condition. Eliade 1957, Parda 59. In effect, all these myths show us primordial man enjoying a beatitude, a spontaneity and freedom, which he has unfortunately lost in consequence of the fall. That is, of what followed upon the mythical that caused the rupture between heaven and earth: immortality, spontaneity, and freedom, the possibility of ascension into heaven and easily meeting with the gods, friendship with the animals, and knowledge of their language. These freedoms and abilities have been lost as the result of a primordial event, the fall of man, expressed as an ontological mutation of his own condition, as well as a cosmic schism. Eliade 1957, Paja 61. Only special members of every culture, like shamans, could continue to move between heaven and earth, between humans and the spirit world. The Koryaks of Siberia remember the mythical era of their great raven, when humans could go up to heaven without difficulty. In our days, they add, it is only shamans who are capable of this. The Bakairi of Brazil think that, for the shaman, heaven is no higher than a house, so that he reaches it in the twinkling of an eye. Eliade 1957, Parjan 65. There are countless myths, tales, and legends concerning human or superhuman beings who fly away into heaven and travel freely between heaven and earth. Again, according to Eliade, the motifs of flight and ascension are attested to at every level of the archaic cultures, as much in the rituals and mythologies of the shamans and the ecstatics as in the myths and folklore of other members of the society who make no pretense to be distinguished by the intensity of their religious experience. A great many symbols and significations to do with spiritual life, and above all, with the power of intelligence, are connected with the images of flight and wings. They all express a break with the universe of everyday experience. Both transcendence and freedom are to be obtained through the flight. Eliade 1957, page 105. It would seem that today's UFO abductees are continuing an amply documented tradition of ascent and extraterrestrial communication. But alien abductions and their effects on abductees possess their own uniqueness. Peter Roychewicz, a folklorist, has compared the experience of today's abductees or experiencers with other aerial and abduction phenomena, and alludes to the possibility of the existence of an intelligence, a spirit, an energy, a consciousness behind UFO experiences and extraordinary encounters of all types that adapts its form and appearance to fit the environment of the times. Roychewicz, 1991. Roychewicz cites the long history of sightings of unusual aerial phenomena and beings or objects of light. In ancient times there were sightings of celestial cars, chariots that flew in the sky, flying palaces that shined and moved about in the sky. There are also many different descriptions of fiery shields in the sky, like triangles. Fiery crosses were also seen over Western Europe. He also notes the presence of clouds or cloudy light surrounding unusual objects, including UFOs, as well as the spontaneous appearance of luminous religious images in the sky, frequently witnessed by thousands of people. In the United States, as recently as the last century, Americans witnessed ships, schooners, and boats sailing in the sky. Roychewicz, 1992. Jerome Clark, after a careful investigation of the airship sightings of the late 1890s, concluded that the vehicles in the sky observed frequently in the United States may have been related to contemporary UFOs, but interpreted according to the technology and mythology of the time. Clark, 1991. According to Mario Pazzaglini, a psychologist who has been interested in the abduction experience for a number of years, Manifestations of a UFO-associated nature have been recorded for the last 10,000 years, starting with an engraving of Ezekiel in the Old Testament, in which he depicts a vision containing wheels, angels, light, and clouds. Pazzaglini, 1992. Unusual sky phenomena were also recorded by the Romans, the Greeks in the 4th century, and in the Middle Ages. Sometimes manifesting as stars, fires in the sky, crosses, lights, or beams, apparitions would often simply disappear or sometimes leave their mark. Many of these sightings were viewed by thousands of people and interpreted as religious miracles. Often these phenomena fit nicely into already existing spiritual beliefs held by the viewers. The phenomenon of humans being transported into other dimensions also has a long history in most cultures. Tibetans have long believed that humans could separate from the etheric or subtle body and go traveling in an out-of-body capacity for hours or days at a time. They have experiences in different places and then return. Tibetans distinguish between different gradations of subtlety and grossness, or density of beings. The mind or consciousness produced by grosser matter cannot communicate with these subtle things. In some, you witness the grosser level of mind subdued and the more subtle mind become active. Then there's an opportunity, a chance to communicate with or sometimes see another being who is more subtle than our mind or body. The Dalai Lama, 1992. Contemporary examples of such entities in the West might be the spirit guides that are reported by many individuals. Descriptions of these spirits who appear to individuals or to intermediaries vary widely. Roychevich includes UFO abductions within a wide range of paranormal experiences, including near-death experiences, powerful psychic, spiritual, mystical, and out-of-body experiences, and encounters with a range of beings, such as witches, fairies, werewolves, that often result, for an individual, in a substantive transformation of values and orientation. The question of whether and why these events occur, of course, remains unanswered. There is much debate even about how to frame such questions. The most commonly debated issue, whether abductions are really taking place, leads us to the center of questions about perception and levels of consciousness. The most glaring question is whether there is any reality independent of consciousness. At the level of personal consciousness, can we apprehend reality directly, or are we by necessity bound by the restrictions of our 5 senses and the mind that organizes our worldview? Is there a shared, collective consciousness that operates beyond our individual consciousness? If there is a collective consciousness, how is it influenced, and what determines its content? Is UFO abduction a product of this shared consciousness? If, as in some cultures, consciousness pervades all elements of the universe, then what function do events like UFO abductions and various mystical experiences play in our psyches and in the rest of the cosmos? These are questions that are not easily answered. Perhaps all we can do at this point in time is to acknowledge the questions as we listen to the experiences of those who have moved beyond our culturally shared ideas of reality. The UFO abduction experience, while unique in many respects, bears resemblance to other dramatic, transformative experiences undergone by shamans, mystics, and ordinary citizens who have had encounters with the paranormal. In all of these experiential realms, the individual's ordinary consciousness is radically transformed. He or she is initiated into a non-ordinary state of being, which results ultimately in a reintegration of the self, an immersion or entrenchment into states and/or knowledge not previously accessible. Sometimes the process is brought on by illness or a traumatic event of some kind, and sometimes the individual is simply pulled into a sequence of states of being from which he or she emerges with new powers and sensitivities. During his initiation, the shaman learns how to penetrate into other dimensions of reality and maintain himself there. His trials, whatever the nature of them, endow him with a sensitivity that can perceive and integrate these new experiences. Through the strangely sharpened senses of the shaman, the sacred manifests itself. Eliade, 1957, Parson 66. Like many abductees, the initiate hones his new sensibilities in the service of wisdom that can be used by his people. Revelation is not just accessible to those in pursuit of enlightenment, but it can knock on any door at any time. Earlier in this century, a Dr. Boucher described what seems to be a certain kind of archetypal experience. He and two friends had spent the evening reading Wordsworth, Keats, Browning, and especially Whitman. He was in a state of almost passive enjoyment. All at once, without warning of any kind, he found himself wrapped round, as it were, by a flame-colored cloud. The next he knew, the light was within himself. Directly afterwards came upon him a sense of exaltation, of immense joyousness accompanied or followed by an intellectual illumination impossible to describe. Into his brain streamed one momentary lightning flash of Brahmic splendor, leaving him thenceforth for always an aftertaste of heaven. Eliade, 1965, Paja 69. The experience of internalizing what is first perceived as external light happens frequently during mystical flashes or transcendental journeys that result in spiritual rebirth. Perhaps an analogy might be drawn to UFO encounters, where the abductee is initially struck by a beam of light, spies a bright ship, and is then taken inside. Brazilian abductees in particular seem to have perceived illuminated clouds, frequently red in color, in association with spaceships. Story 1980. The mystic or the shaman, like the abductee, makes a pilgrimage, usually with ardor, to receive a new dimension of experience or knowledge. This involves a rebirth which is sometimes very distressing, a retracing of one's steps to a preternatural primordial arena to recondition the consciousness of the experiencer. The resulting psychic chaos is a metaphor for the pre-cosmogenic chaos, amorphic yet penetrating, that the individual has been exposed to. The abductee is a modern Dante, whose ontological underpinnings are unraveled. Returned to his bed or his car after his time with aliens, he struggles to reassemble his worldview. Most often, he undertakes his journey alone, and many times his absence is not even noticed by those to whom he might turn to corroborate his coordinates. Jacques Vallée, perhaps the most comprehensive cross-cultural ufology investigator, discusses the international history of UFO encounters in his two books, Dimensions and Passport to Magonia. Describing hundreds of sightings of strange sky-borne objects and their occupants across time, continents, and societies, he cites the seemingly unexplainable presence of discs in the symbology of various civilizations. The Phoenicians and early Christians, for instance, associated them with communications between angels and God. He compares some of the phenomenology of a UFO encounter with historical records of experiences of a mystical nature. Beams of light commonly play a role in both UFO and out-of-body encounters. Vallée, 1988, Pyra 34. As for the beings themselves, Vallée draws many analogies to the worldwide sighting of non-human, shape-shifting, aerially adept beings throughout history. These beings appear to mankind in thousands of different guises. They possess extraordinary powers and frequently aim to partake of and/or take away something belonging to humans, desiring to communicate with or simply play tricks on them. He concludes, the UFO occupants, like the elves of old, are not extraterrestrials. They are denizens of another reality. 1988, Parja 96. Vallée believes that abductees' interaction with aliens is a part of an age-old and worldwide myth that has shaped our belief structures, our scientific expectations, and our view of ourselves. 1988, page 99. He writes, "The same power attributed to saucer people was once the exclusive property of fairies." 1988, page 134. Valley draws parallels between religious apparitions, the fairy faith, the reports of dwarf-like beings with supernatural powers, the airship tales in the United States in the last century, and the present stories of UFO landings. 1988, page 140. He speculates broadly, or should we hypothesize that an advanced race somewhere in the universe and sometime in the future has been showing us three-dimensional space operas for the last 2,000 years in an attempt to guide our civilization? If so, do they deserve our congratulations? Are we dealing instead with a parallel universe, another dimension, where there are human races living, and where we may go at our expense, never to return to the present? Are these races only semi-human, so that in order to maintain contact with us, they need crossbreeding with men and women of our planet? Is this the origin of the many tales and legends where genetics plays a great role, the symbolism of the Virgin in occultism and religion, the fairy tales involving human midwives and changelings, the sexual overtones of the flying saucer reports, the biblical stories of intermarriage between the Lord's angels and terrestrial women whose offspring were giants? From that mysterious universe are higher beings projecting objects that can materialize and dematerialize at will. Are the UFOs windows rather than objects? There is nothing to support these assumptions, and yet, in view of the historical continuity of the phenomenon, alternatives are hard to find, unless we deny the reality of all the facts, as our peace of mind would indeed prefer. 1988, page 143-44. Where facts are lean, inconsistent, or disparate, human beings, Valley assures us, are quick to fill in the gaps. Because many observations of UFO phenomena appear self-consistent and at the same time irreconcilable with scientific knowledge, a logical vacuum has been created that human imagination tries to fill with fantasy. 1988, page 145. Ultimately, Valley prescribes our remaining open to learning from phenomena that we do not yet understand. These unexplained observations need not represent a visitation from space visitors, but something even more interesting, a window toward undiscovered dimensions of our environment. 1988, page 203. I believe that the UFO phenomenon represents evidence for other dimensions beyond space-time. The UFOs may not come from ordinary space, but from a multiverse which is all around us, and of which we have stubbornly refused to consider the disturbing reality in spite of the evidence available to us for centuries. 1988, page 253. The UFO abduction phenomenon. Worldwide, another question concerns the worldwide distribution of abductions, or reports of the phenomenon, which may be quite a different matter. UFO abductions have been reported and collected most frequently in Western countries, or countries dominated by Western culture and values. But our investigations are revealing that the phenomenon, in its familiar form, occurs among native peoples in North and South America and in Africa. The first publication of an abduction case took place in Brazil, involving the reported abduction of the son of a rancher, Antonio Vilas Boas, in 1957. Reports of UFO sightings worldwide, however, far outnumber accounts of actual abductions. The most comprehensive guide to abductions overseas was put together in 1987 by Thomas Bullard, a folklorist at the University of Indiana. Bullard, 1987. Bullard's lists reported abductions from 17 countries, including Argentina, Australia, Bolivia, Brazil, Canada, Chile, England, Finland, France, Poland, South Africa, the Soviet Union, Spain, Uruguay, and West Germany. The United States leads the way in sheer numbers of reported abductions, with England and Brazil following behind, perhaps because of the availability of practicing therapists working with abductees in these countries. In illustration of this point, China boasts the largest number of witnesses of a single UFO sighting. In August 24, 1981, 1 million Chinese saw a spiral-shaped UFO simultaneously, Chiang, 1993. But there is no record of any follow-up questioning of individual witnesses. The therapeutic exploration of abduction experiences is, however, gradually catching hold. In May 1993, Germany's second-largest television station presented a 45-minute documentary about the abduction phenomenon, which won Germany's highest television award. Even accounts of UFO sightings are, throughout the world, shrouded in secrecy. Spain's Ministry of Defense UFO files were released in 1992. These contain mostly reports of sightings by Air Force personnel. Much work remains to be done in persuading other nations similarly to open up classified files on the subject. In some countries, where people hold all sorts of beliefs in supernatural beings, abduction experiences are confused or simply connected with other visitations. Cynthia Hind, a researcher from South Africa, reports, "Their reactions are as perhaps Westerners would react to ghosts, not necessarily terrified, or not always so, but certainly wary of what they see." Hind, 1993, para 17. Abductees overseas seem to have contact with a greater variety of entities than Americans. These range from tiny men to tall, hooded beings, and include naked individuals of both sexes and humanoid beings, with every manner or shape of head, feet, and hands. A Dutch couple recently described their UFO visitors as being tiny and appearing in rainbow hues: green, orange, and purple. Personal Communication, September 1992. But universal properties of the abduction experience remain. Most often, abductees everywhere are compellingly drawn toward a powerful light, often while they are driving or asleep in their beds. Invariably, they are later unable to account for a lost period of time, and they frequently bear physical and psychological scars of their experience. These range from nightmares and anxiety to chronic nervous agitation, depression, and even psychosis, to actual physical scars, puncture and incision marks, scrapes, bumms, and sores. Some encounters are traumatizing, mysterious, even seemingly sinister. Others seem to bear a healing and educational intent. Often, abductees report they are told or warned by the beings not to tell about their experiences. Even less well documented than the actual abductions are the consequences of the experience. In working with abductees, Gilda Moura, a Brazilian psychologist, reports on the paranormal abilities many Brazilian abductees experience after an encounter. These include increased telepathic abilities, clairvoyance, visions, and the receiving of spiritual messages, which are often concerned with world ecology, the future of humankind, and social justice. Many abductees decide to change their profession after their experience. Moura, 1995. It is likely that with the publicizing of therapeutic and hypnosis techniques currently being pioneered in the United States, much more information about abduction experiences overseas will be available in coming years. For the rest of the world certainly does not lack awareness of the UFO phenomenon, as is evidenced by the proliferation of UFO bureaus, offices, and research organizations abroad. Modern-day abduction experiences. With the exception of the 1957 Villas-Boas case, referred to above, the modern history of abductions begins with the experience of Barney and Betty Hill in September 1961, Fuller 1966. The Hills, a stable, respectable interracial couple living in New Hampshire, had suffered from disturbing symptoms for more than 2 years when they reluctantly consulted Boston psychiatrist Benjamin Simon. Barney was an insomniac and Betty had frequent nightmares. Both were so persistently anxious that it became intolerable for them to continue their lives without looking into disturbing repercussions of the September night in which they could not account for 2 hours during the return journey from a holiday in Montreal. Except for the distresses related to the incident they described, Dr. Simon reported no psychiatric illness. The Hills reported that on the night of September 19, 1961, they observed an unusual flying object occupied by small grey humanoid beings with unusual eyes. Before this, they had noticed an erratically moving light and then a strange craft. With binoculars, Barney had been able to see the creatures inside the craft. The Hills were amnesiac about what happened to them during the missing hours until undergoing repeated hypnosis sessions with Dr. Simon. In their meetings with him, Dr. Simon instructed the Hills not to tell each other details of the memories that were emerging. After being taken from their car, the Hills said they were led by the beings against their wills onto a craft. Each reported that on the craft they were placed on a table and subjected to detailed medical-like examinations with taking of skin and hair samples. A needle was inserted into Betty's abdomen and a pregnancy test performed. Researchers have reported recently that Barney said that a sperm sample was taken from him, a fact that was originally withheld by him and John Fuller, who later wrote about their case because it was too humiliating at the time for Barney to admit. Jacobs, 1992. The Hills said that the beings communicated with them telepathically, non-verbally, as if it were in English. The Hills were told to forget what had happened. Despite Dr. Simon's belief that the Hills had experienced some sort of shared dream or fantasy, a kind of folie à deux, they persisted in their conviction that these events really happened, and that they had not communicated the corroborating details to each other during the investigation of their symptoms. Barney, who died in 1969 at the age of 46, had been particularly reluctant to believe in the reality of the experience, lest he appear irrational. "I wish I could think it was an hallucination," he told Dr. Simon when the doctor pressed him. But in the end, Barney concluded, "We had seen and been a part of something different than anything I had seen before, and these things did happen to me." Betty, who continues to speak publicly about her experience, also believes in the reality of these events. In 1975, a film about the Hill case, the UFO incident, starring James Earl Jones as Barney, was shown on television in the United States. A number of books and articles documented abduction experiences by other individuals in the years following the Hills' testimony. Lorenzen and Lorenzen, 1976, Lorenzen and Lorenzen, 1977, Heisel, 1978, Fowler, 1979, Rogo, 1980, Druffel and Rogo, 1980, Bullard, 1987, Pipard, 1/15, Clark, 1990, Par 2. It has been the pioneering research of New York artist and sculptor Bud Hopkins, however, over almost 2 decades with hundreds of abductees, that has established the essential consistency of the abduction phenomenon. Hopkins's first book, Missing Time, published in 1981, documented the unaccounted-for time periods and associated symptoms that indicate that abduction experiences might have taken place, as well as the characteristic details of such experiences. Hopkins, 1981. Hopkins also found that abduction experiences were possibly associated with previously unexplainable small cuts, body scars, and scoop marks. The narratives even suggested that small objects or implants may have been inserted in victims' noses, legs, and other body parts. In his second book, Intruders, published in 1987, Hopkins defined the sexual and reproductive episodes that have come to be associated with the abduction phenomenon. Hopkins, 1987. Temple University historian David Jacobs has further refined the basic reported pattern of an abduction experience. Jacobs, 1992. Jacobs identifies primary phenomena such as manual or instrument examination, staring, and urological gynecological procedures. Secondary events, including machine examination, visualization, and child presentation. And ancillary events, among them miscellaneous additional physical, mental, and sexual activities and procedures. Polls of the prevalence of the UFO abduction phenomenon in the United States, including a survey of nearly 6,000 Americans conducted by the Roper Organization between July and September 1991, Hopkins, Jacobs, and Westrom, 1991, suggest that from several 100,000 to several million Americans may have had abduction or abduction-related experiences. The Roper poll has been justly criticized on the grounds that the indicators of possible abduction used, such as seeing unusual lights, missing time, or a feeling of flying, may not in fact actually mean that an abduction has occurred. But an even more serious difficulty in estimating the prevalence of abductions lies in the fact that we do not know what an abduction really is, the extent, for example, to which it represents an event in the physical world, or to which it is an unusual subjective experience with physical manifestations. A still greater problem resides in the fact that memory in relation to abduction experiences behaves rather strangely, as in the cases, for example, of Ed, Chapter 3, or Arthur, Chapter 15. The memory of an abduction may be outside of consciousness until triggered many years later by another experience or situation that becomes associated with the original event. The experiencer in a situation such as this could be counted on the negative side of the ledger before the triggering experience and on the positive side after it. None of this work, in my view, has come to terms with the potential implications of the abduction phenomenon for the expansion of human consciousness, or the meaning for our world of this apparent opening to a mysterious reality that may be beyond the manifest physical world.